Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Strategies that Enable Patients Access to MIS, Perspectives from Washington University, Barnes-Jewish Hospital. I am Brian Zimmerman with Becker's Hospital Review. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thank you for joining us today. So before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. You will find a few different engagement tools on your dashboard. Please check out our resources section and also make sure you fill out our session survey. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. Lastly, if at any time you have trouble with the audio or video, please try refreshing your browser. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We are here to help. It is my pleasure to now introduce our speakers for today. First, Dr. Jackie Martin is Vice President of Perioperative Services at Barnes-Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. He is joined today by Dr. Michael Awad, Director of Robotics and Associate Professor of Surgery, Andrew Pierce, Director of Supply Chain, and Jim Thomas, Manager of Perioperative Performance Improvement and IS. Today, they will share several strategic initiatives to align stakeholders, utilize actionable data for evidence-based change management and cost reductions, and increase patients' access to minimally invasive surgery and help achieve the quadruple aim. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. The floor is yours.
I'm going to give you my perspective as a healthcare executive on the who, what, when, where, and why around robotic surgery. So why robotic surgery? Our philosophy is that we want to be able to provide the optimal approach for each patient at all the time. And sometimes the optimal approach may be an open surgical approach, it may be a laparoscopic approach, but sometimes it will be a robotic surgical approach. The era of modern open surgery has been around for about 150 years, laparoscopic surgery for about 35 years, and robotic surgery for around 20 years. The opportunity exists, though, to expand robotic surgery to patients and clinicians. Now, most places will provide an open surgical approach all hours of the day and night. And this is also true of laparoscopic surgery, but if you think about robotic surgery, most programs will offer that modality during prime time, which is 7:30 to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So there's an opportunity to expand robotic surgery. If you think about that, it's really about 28% of the week. And if you look at 80% utilization of that time, we're talking about 23% of the week where robotic surgery is available for patients. Does this align with our vision for our patients, with the vision for our clinicians, and the vision for the enterprise? Probably not. So for additional perspective, this isn't just a question around intuitive robots. We're a major academic medical center. We have a number of different robotic platforms. We have robotic platforms for partial and total knees, the Mako platform by Stryker. We have robots for neurosurgery, the ROSA 1 by Zimmer. And we have two different spine robots, one from Medtronic and one from Globus. So this idea of making technology available, meeting patients where they are, is one that transcends just the intuitive Da Vinci. It encompasses a number of different technological platforms. So how do we make technology available and more accessible to patients and clinicians? Two important questions around this are we fully leveraging the opportunity and the value that this technology affords if we continue to limit its access? And secondarily, if you think about this question, what are the technologies or capital investments do you have that you restrict to less than 23% of the available time? Not many, if any. We get this question. We used to get this question more often than not, and that was, Dr. Martin, we've got these robots available, and I've got a patient I want to do tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, and you won't let me use the robot on Saturday. That doesn't make sense to me. And if you really think about that, it's all comes down to operational barriers, if you will. We have the technology, we have a patient, we have a surgeon, so why can't we make this happen? And one of the important things to think about as we begin this journey to expanding access is to ensure that the outcomes are the same, that the safety, the quality, and the experience is the same as we move outside of the prime time robotics bubble. In order to do that, we're going to have to make sure we have competent staff, and that's nurses, bedside assistants. We have good support from central sterile processing and also from materials management. This really begins with creating and aligning our goals across our different levels of leadership. And again, this starts with the philosophy that we want to be able to afford the best surgical approach for any particular patient at that time. And again, it may be open, it may be laparoscopic, but when the answer is robotic surgery, we want to make sure that we can provide robotic surgery as a critical component of our clinical service line offerings. In order to do that, we've got to align with our intuitive partners, with our hospital leadership, with our clinical leaders to ensure that we all have the same vision, the same goal, the same strategy, and then we empower our teams to go ahead and execute plans in order to make this happen. So again, what we want to be able to do is leverage this technology, right? Leverage this technology and expand its access. We want to create the right culture for safety and quality. And so how do we do this? It really goes back to, again, aligning our vision with our strategy, creating a team, creating a plan, executing that plan, and then collecting data and doing regular lookbacks. In our program, we were able to successfully implement a plan similar to this and grow our program and increase access across the prime time and outside of prime time. If you look at the immediate benefits of expanding access at our program, we've grown really exponentially over the last 3 years by incorporating these tools into our clinical operations. This has also afforded us a chance to grow outside of the normal areas of growth with robotics, which have traditionally been GYN oncology and urology, to more general surgery. And particularly over the last 2 years for us, to grow it in the arena of transplant surgery. This shows our donor transplant robotics growth over the last 3 years. We'll double the number this year, and we've recently done our first robotic recipient kidney transplant. A lot of transplants for us are done off hours and on weekends. And so this idea of growing access outside of the normal primetime bubble will resonate as we continue to show robotic surgical growth in general surgery. So again, our strategy is just like yours, is to build an excellent primetime robotic surgery program, but then expand that program to off hours and weekends. And the reason that we want to do this again is so that a clinician and a patient can be afforded the optimal surgical approach at that particular time. In addition, it allows us to leverage the institutional assets for the benefit of patients, clinicians, and for the enterprise. Now, as we do that, we have to make sure that we keep in mind that we have access to technology, that we have a plan to keep technology current, that it's a cost-effective option, and that it brings value to all of our customers. And customers are our patients, our clinicians, our providers, and the institution. And so when we think about this, the who is all customers, all patients, all clinicians, the enterprise. The what is value-added technology that robotic surgery brings. The when is 24/7, just like laparoscopic and open surgery. The where is where it makes sense. And the why is because robotic surgery will be the best solution for some patients. And where that is the case, we want to make sure that we're able to afford that opportunity. I'm now going to move on to my colleague, Dr. Michael Awad.
Okay, and thank you, Dr. Martin. I'm Michael Awad. I'm Director of Robotic Surgery for BJC Healthcare. It is my pleasure to join the panel today. I'll be talking about clinical outcomes, defining patient and hospital value, and focusing on two main areas. Myself as a clinician, I'm an MIS surgeon and do benign foregut surgery, and about how we build the team to enable success. Many times we focus on the upstream costs of robotic surgery, the instrument and accessory costs, the capital costs, and how much time spent in the operating room. But just as important, if not more important than these, are the downstream savings. And for me as a clinician, this admittedly is where I place a lot of my attention, on the length of stay, blood transfusions, complications, conversions, and other clinical outcome measures. So towards that point, I'd like to share with you a little story about why I prefer robotic surgery from a clinician perspective. I do surgery on the esophagus, and the esophagus is a very hard place to access. It is well protected within the body, protected by the rib cage, the heart in the front, the great vessels in the back, and so forth. Trying to get there from the abdomen requires access through a very small window through the diaphragm, about the size of a quarter. I think of it as trying to look through a keyhole with conventional laparoscopic instruments. This is often what it feels like. And then if you try to get your instrumentation through there, it sometimes feels like this. So to me, the robotic advantage is highlighted in tight, narrow spaces. And this is why it took off first in urology and GYN, but increasingly so now in general surgery and other fields. The data, I think, is what drives many of us as far as the value. So I'd like to share with you examples of how we've put together data that we've collected internally and how we combine that with data Intuitive Surgical provides us to determine the best outcomes for our patients. This is a manuscript we published last year in Surgical Endoscopy, where we looked at our short-term clinical outcomes in patients who underwent robotic surgery for hiatal hernia repairs. This was a 10-year experience that we collected through an internal database at our institution with over 1,000 foregut experiences. We try to make sure that both patient groups were the same, and this is another key point when looking at the data. Are you truly comparing apples to apples and not disparate patient groups? So indeed, our patient groups were similar. And we looked at a number of, again, key clinical outcome measures. In my field, one of the areas that we struggle with is how do we get the stomach out of the chest back into the abdomen when we repair hiatal hernias? Sometimes esophageal lengthening is done when we can't do this sufficiently, but this is an inadequate option for our patients. With conventional laparoscopic procedures, this is done 11% of the time, which is unacceptably high. With the robotic approach, we've had to do this one time out of 1,000 patients. And this was a particularly challenging circumstance, but otherwise this was a significant reduction in the need to do this so-called esophageal lengthening procedure. One of the other issues, which I think we don't have to convince anybody about, is starting a procedure minimally invasively and finishing it minimally invasively. So we also tracked how often we had to convert to an open thoracic or open abdominal approach. Laparoscopically, this had to be done 7% of the time. Robotically, still to this day, we've never had to convert to an open procedure. And I think this is one of the key findings we found from our clinical outcomes database. There are many other outcomes that we've published on besides what I've just discussed, including operative time, estimated blood loss, intraoperative injury, and others. And we've also looked at cost equivalency, at least with instrument and accessory costs. We've also looked at long-term outcomes data. Again, with the ability of having a powerful data set, we can ask these rigorous questions and find these answers. One of the things that affects my field is the recurrence rates of hiatal hernias can be as high as 59% at 5 years. I think you can see why this too is unacceptably high. With the robotic approach, we've tracked our patients longitudinally, and we found that at 5 years, we've been able to reduce this recurrence rate from 59% down to 9%. No other intervention to date has been able to result in this marked difference, and we're really excited about being able to offer this clinical improvement to our patients. In summary, on the clinical side, we're finding that the robotic approach does find us with these key downstream benefits to our patients, as well as to the healthcare system as a whole. I mentioned this data, and this is not just for myself, but also for our system as a whole. We combined our internal data with that provided by Intuitive for what's called the Market Access and Custom Analytics Program, or the MACA program. And this is for Barnes-Jewish Hospital soft tissue surgery. You can see key financial and operational key performance indicators, or KPIs. For robotics, we're seeing a reduction in the average length of stay, the contribution margin per length of stay. Related readmissions is significantly lower for our robotic procedures compared to other modalities. And this is true, again, across skin and soft tissue infections. Transfusion rates are lower. Conversion rates, not just for hiatal hernia repairs, but across the board is lower. And these are key, not just for clinicians, but obviously for hospital administrators as well. If you take home nothing else but this, I'd encourage you to focus on this slide. And again, I think no one really argues that open surgery is not our goal for our patients. This is over a 3-year time period from 2017 with the kickoff of our robotic surgery integrated program. We've seen that our open surgery rate has reduced from 49% to 42%. And this was due to a concomitant increase in our robotic surgery approach with a 7% increase in our procedures. And I think we've been very excited about this, and we hope to see this continuing reduction in open surgery continue. So how do we do this? Let's talk about how we built this team to get to this. And Dr. Martin alluded to this already, but we have a rather large and complex healthcare system called BJC Healthcare, made of 15 institutions in our HSOs. 31,000 employees is the largest employer in our state and the greater St. Louis region. And as part of this, we found that we needed to organize ourselves. So we stood up this, what's called the Robotics Governance Committee. This is a committee that covers all of the hospitals at which we have robotic systems. This group meets on a quarterly basis, and we talk about synergies across the healthcare system, how we can work together, sharing best practices, how we can meet common challenges. Now, this is further subdivided into the various institutions have their own organizational structure. Barnes-Jewish Hospital is the largest of these. And inside that, we have a group and a team dedicated around robotics. You've met Dr. Martin, who's our Vice President of Surgical Services. I serve as Director of Robotic Surgery, which is a new role created for this initiative. We have a steering committee, which I'll speak about shortly, as well as an operations committee that handles the day-to-day, week-to-week robotic operations. We'll talk about some of the key members of that group, but the Robotic Steering Committee for Barnes-Jewish Hospital meets regularly every month. This group meets without fail. It is a standing room only group that discusses our robotic program at BJH, our operations, our clinical topics. We talk about education and training opportunities, as well as our joint research initiatives. This steering committee is not only all of the clinical service lines, but we also find it important to have our Intuitive surgical partners at the table during these meetings, as they provide a key perspective and a direct line of communication where appropriate. Our Robotics Coordinator is another key member of this team. This person organizes the steering committee, but also has many other roles. This role was created at the onset of the robotic surgery initiative in 2017. This coordinator oversees the robotic administrative, clinical, and technical operations across our hospital campus. She serves as the liaison between administration, clinical teams, and Intuitive Surgical. We found it important to elaborate a job description for this individual, which we're happy to share. Another key component of this team is our First Assistant program. We use RN First Assistants, or RNFAs, and they provide a credentialed assistant at the bedside. For education purposes, we are a teaching institution, and it allows our trainees to leave the bedside and sit at the second console for our robotic cases, which is ideal from a training perspective. But even more, this person allows the nursing team to have quicker and more efficient turnovers and provides a constant set of knowledge that can be helpful to provide safe care for these patients at the bedside. We also have our scheduler in tune with the robotic surgery platform. As Dr. Martin alluded to in his presentation, part of the key drivers of that growth have been making sure that our robotic OR block days are dedicated to robotic cases. So we do not allow a mixed model in our robotic rooms. We have a very clear and transparent schedule and guidelines for how these rooms are to be used to optimize utilization. Another key member of the robotics team that you're about to meet, Jim Thomas, who's our manager of perioperative information systems, will share with you the intricacies of how he uses our internal data to measure our growth, to look at areas for further development and opportunities. And he'll talk to you about how he uses that as well. And finally, Andrew Pierce, who is Director of Supply Chain, will share with you also how he uses financial data, both internally and externally, to look at our robotic operations and how we can do this most cost effectively. Another key part of our program is curriculum and training. I also serve as director of our simulation center, and we find it incredibly important to have everyone who touches the robotic system, from the nurses, the coordinators, the first assistants, and the surgeons, be well trained in not only the routine operation of our systems, but also emergency systems such as emergency undocking. Furthermore, we find it important to continue this training and to share beyond our boundaries. We do have a setup to enable training across hospitals and outside of our normal boundaries, and the COVID pandemic has really enabled this. So we use a telepresence system to allow us to train surgeons and teams at other institutions to enable us to facilitate this care, and happy to speak about this as well. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A session.
All right, thank you, Dr. Awad. My name is Jim Thomas. I manage the performance improvement in the information systems team for perioperative services here at our facility. I want to talk to you a little bit about how we use our quality data management to support our program. You've seen parts of this slide earlier in the presentation. We started doing robotic surgery at our institution in 2007, and for 10 years, we kind of cruised along on our volume, and we thought we were doing really, really well at 500 to 600 cases a year. We really had simple data, and the reality is we kind of had unclear results. As you've seen in earlier slides, starting in 2017, we put some pieces together and really showed dramatic growth in our program. So prior to that dramatic growth, this is what we had, and I refer to this as simple data. Our robotics cases were tracked. We could count the number of robotic surgeries that we did, in which rooms that we did them. This was tracked manually. We had some basic case information, case times, some overall robotics times, and our goal at that point for utilization was simply to perform 2 robotic cases per block day per room. We thought that was a pretty good metric, and that served us well up to a point. We started to see some challenges by getting additional surgeons and services on board doing robotic surgery, and we knew that we really needed to do better. So part of what we put together to help support this dramatic growth was more detailed analytics. We also put together a structured program around how did we manage robotics here, not only from a data perspective, but really from overall total access. Now, you've just seen this is the structure that we put into place. Prior to 2017, we did not have most of the roles on this chart that were assigned directly to robotics. We did not have the director of robotic surgery or the operations committee that you see all the key members there. I do want to call out one key member though here is our robotics coordinator. This was a role that was created in 2017 and was really instrumental to helping support the dramatic growth that we did see in our robotics program. This person is responsible for the day-to-day management of all aspects of robotics, from working with the surgeons to make sure that they have everything that they need, to credentialing process, to education, and really support of all of the key team members across this. Without this robotics coordinator role, we would not have been able to see the growth that we had. Reality behind this is it really takes a team to see the type of growth that we did. Now, again, you've seen this slide before, but starting in 2017, we saw a nearly 50% increase in 2018 over that prior year. 2019, again, 40% growth. Even with a significant impact from COVID, we still managed to see 9% growth last year. All right, so how did we do that? Well, we put together more quality metrics. Instead of that tabular slide that I showed you on utilization earlier, we really drilled down into creating some better visuals around many of the metrics that we knew that we needed to use to support the program. This is what we use now for a high level OR utilization. Pretty quick and easy to take a look at to see where our opportunities are. The blue band is the total allocation of OR time for robotics for that particular service, and the red hash mark is a percentage of that allocated time that that service used performing a robotics case. Our goal is to keep that number up 75 to 80%, and it's really easy to call out and see where you have opportunities from a visual like this. We know that the green circles there, colorectal and our otolaryngology group, were really knocking it out of the ballpark on cases. They had significant growth, and at the time what their block allocation was, they were picking up robotics time any place that they could, which is how you can come up with over 100% utilization. We know that in this particular month, we had a couple of other services that really had opportunity. One month doesn't make a trend, but it really just highlighted a focus area to take a look at, to either pay attention to for future months or to do a deeper drill down into where we were. The other thing that we tried to use our quality data for was really to improve our outcomes from a quality standard. We understood that our turnaround times compared to our peers was significantly longer, and we knew it was much longer than what we wanted it to be at our institution. We put some processes in place, starting with a pilot within our MIS program, and we established a 30-minute turnaround time for our robotics. And due to some pieces that we had put into place with notifying the team when their turnover time was longer than we expected, and then really getting that feedback, MIS was the first service to actually get their turnaround times on median below our goal. But as you can see there from the other services that operated in that location, we did start to see a pretty significant impact, and our actual numbers for last month, all of our robotics cases had a 30-minute median turnaround time. So really dramatic results there in a fairly short period of time. One of the other things that we take a look at is our case scheduling accuracy. It's difficult to manage our intraoperative time if we don't know exactly how long the case is going to take to perform. So on our case scheduling request, we ask the surgeon to provide the estimated time for their cut to close portion, and then we compare that to what it actually took to perform the surgery. The yellow, green, and red visual on the left-hand side is just a quick snapshot of how each surgeon performed over a rolling 3-month period, with the green portion there being the percentage of their cases that we deemed as being scheduled accurately. For the procedures that were our outliers, we can show those and see if there's any pattern or any consistency there. And we can even drill this down into individual surgeon level performance within each of those outlier procedures. Detailed analytics like this help us really drill down and focus on the areas that we need to continue to improve our program overall. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. I'd like to hand it over to Andrew Pierce.
Okay, thank you, Jim, for introducing me. I'm Andrew Pierce, Director for Supply Plus and Perioperative Business at Barnes-Jewish Hospital, and I'm going to describe our strategy, tactics, and outcomes for cost management, and specifically supply cost transparency at our academic medical center while we have grown robotic volumes in pursuit of optimal clinical outcomes. Health care costs in the U.S. are high. This is not news, representing up to 18% of total GDP, which is substantially higher than our industrialized countries that we compare against. While the rate of increase has leveled off in recent years, we know from signals from CMS that payment increases will be modest, which continues to put emphasis on healthcare providers of managing the expenses in delivering that care. This graphic depicts our cost structure at the hospital. It's dominated by labor, with supplies as a close second. Our management tactics for matching labor to inpatient volumes are fairly well rehearsed, but our expertise in techniques for managing supply expense were underdeveloped. We benchmarked fairly highly against some of our peers, and so between the hospital and School of Medicine, we together set a strategy for prioritizing supply costs as an area of focus and invested in infrastructure to bend this cost curve. The task force we created between Barnes-Jewish Hospital and Washington School of Medicine included a departmental leadership assignment of faculty leaders, the creation of decision venues within specialties to develop cost transparency tools, set contracting strategies, review new products, and monitor outcomes. Rather than emphasizing standardization, we focused on a low-cost approach, recognizing that the consistency that would come of that would be a welcome byproduct. The effort involved local and system investments in expertise, new strategies to be purposeful in contracting for preferred products, providing comparative data to surgeons regarding product usage, aligning inventory to future expected usage, all while creating robust and reliable processes for introducing new products and for ensuring that product is on the shelf as expected. The primary strategy we used was cost transparency, making visible the cost of the product to the physician decision makers. The table on the top right shows the cost curve we have bent, total supply dollars spent annually. You can see that for a decade, we were growing our supply costs at 8% a year. But over the past 7 years, we've seen that trend change to be under 2% of compound annual growth rate. And it's not because we aren't growing volumes. The bottom left table shows the trend in supply over net revenue. And we've decreased this measure by 4.7 percentage points over the time period, generating a significant boon to the organization. And this has been funding team member pay raises and new equipment and new buildings on campus. I'm going to show you a couple of tools that we use and have been our kind of main efforts for providing visibility to the price of products. The first is a quarterly surgeon scorecard. The report shows intraoperative record of items used and their acquisition costs for each surgeon to see his or her own top 5 procedures by total cost. For each procedure, the surgeon can see the outcomes for other surgeons who are doing that procedure, as well as the trends over time. The report is pushed quarterly to every attending surgeon at Barnes-Jewish Hospital. The report's unblinded and is intended to generate dialogue between surgeons about lower cost tactics and product choices. Our robotic surgeons have been particularly engaged to monitor and improve cost per case trends, including one particular urology surgeon who in response to this data made changes to his product usage to reduce his prostatectomy cost per case by 11%. Another descriptive tool that we've subsequently put in place is a supply receipt for every OR case. Working with our EMR vendor, we implemented a post-case in-basket message to the surgeon that shows the line item detail of the supplies used and acquisition costs with some historical context, including surgeon's average cost and the average cost for other surgeons who have done that procedure over the past 6 months. The message is generated automatically within the EMR at the time the patient leaves the operating room. The purpose of the tool is to allow the surgeon to identify where products cost more than expected, as well as to increase documentation accuracy. We've seen several examples of this report's utility, including a vascular surgeon who identified a hemostatic agent that was documented as open and used but was not needed. He got together with his peers within the section, and they as a group decided to remove it from their preference card so that it wouldn't arrive and be opened before it was requested as needed. This resulted in a 42% decrease in the use of that product over the ensuing year. A related element of continuous improvement within the program, robotic program, is documentation accuracy. We've worked with Intuitive to create a flow where we access the robot's record of intraoperative items used, and then we compare that to the documentation in our EMR to reconcile and correct. Upon beginning this process, we found that over half of our robotic cases had some sort of inaccuracy, making the data visible to the intraoperative team, including the surgeons, via the receipt. We've seen a marked improvement to now we're under 25% of cases that have some sort of correction still needed. Consequently, we continue to innovate on the process side to make it easier for the circulating nurse to document what has happened in the case correctly. These charts depict the supply cost per case outcomes that we've seen over time within our robotic surgery program. On the left is the cost with Intuitive for each case we've done with them over the past 5 years, where we've seen some movement up and down within each of the years, driven largely by the onboarding of new surgeons who may have sort of a low-cost bent personally, as well as the introduction of new procedure types. As an example, doing more procedures that require stapling to accomplish the case will necessarily drive cost per case up. And so that's not a challenge with usage or prices. That's simply a mix change that can increase the cost per case. But in 2021, thus far, we are essentially flat to where we were in 2016 for the cost for Intuitive's instruments and accessories to do a robotic case at Pontiac Hospital. Even more important is the chart on the right, which is the overall supply cost per case in our robotic surgery cases. So this includes, but is not exclusive to, the Intuitive expenses. This measure shows that we are down significantly since 2016 in our supply cost per case. The use of descriptive data to enable surgeons to be informed about their case's costs, activate natural competitiveness, and involve expense in the context and the content of education. It creates a culture of cost awareness in our ORs. That's the culture in which we see these results. In addition to the context of our cost management efforts, we have to take some specific steps too. And this is one of the major advances to achieve these outcomes. This is an introduction. This reflects an introduction of a new line of instruments from Intuitive that occurred in the fourth quarter of 2020, where a portion of their instruments were redesigned with longer lives, so more uses for the instrument before it was discarded. That increased the usage by 20 to 80%. We're seeing a significant reduction, so 27% reduction in cost per case for these products from the old generation to the new generation. And at our volumes, we've projected this to be a $240,000 run rate reduction. So this is reflected in the advances we're seeing in 2021 rates. As a concluding comparison, we're pursuing a rigorous cost management program at the same time that we're growing robotic surgery. On the left is the chart that Dr. Awad mentioned, growing robotic surgery at the expense of open surgery. And as we work closely with our surgeons, we've been able to achieve both that growth and a reduction in supply cost per case while advancing clinical care. So I will turn it back over to Dr. Martin to wrap us up.
My colleagues and I have told our story of our journey to increase access to robotic surgery, the importance that we believe that this modality provides as part of a complete clinical service line offering. It's important to have a strategy and a vision, to have a plan, to execute that plan, the importance of data analytics, the importance of the finance pieces, so that as we continue to grow the program, we can do it in a cost-effective manner that brings value not only to clinicians and patients, but also to the enterprise. We will move forward and entertain questions. We're not there yet. We're not complete. We're still continuing to build and grow across our system and trying to bring some of the lessons that we learned at BJH to the other HSOs at BJC. Thank you for your time and attention, and we'll move on to questions and answers. Thank you all very much.
Thank you to Dr. Martin, Dr. Awad, Jim, and Andrew. We'd like to now open up the Q&A. Please submit any questions through the Q&A box that you see on your screen. And if we're not able to get it in the time we have left, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the program to get those addressed. So Dr. Martin, this first question is for you. The attendee asks, it can be hard to change the culture around robotics at a large academic institution. How are you able to align your teams to grow your program?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And again, when I arrived here in 2017, we had robotics here for 10 years. And as it was mentioned by Jim earlier, Jim Thomas, we were doing about 500 cases a year over those 10 years. So we had a program, we had surgeons doing robot cases. We really didn't have an integrated robotic surgery program. So the first step was looking in the mirror and acknowledging that we did not have an integrated program and asking the question, do we want to do better? Do we want to be better? The answer was yes. From our clinicians, it was yes from our administration, and it was yes from our intuitive partners. And so we began there to put a plan together to move to growing and expanding access to robotic surgery. Part of that, again, was the theme that I sort of tried to weave through my portion of the talk, and that is we want to be able to offer robotic surgery as an option, just like we would offer laparoscopic and open surgery as an option to any patient where that is the best solution. So how do we do that? And so we did all the things that we talked about. It was about optimizing the investment, but also we are a large academic medical center. And many of our residents now, the best residents, are showing up asking the question, what will my robotic surgery experience be should I choose to come to your institution? And so we will not be able and are not able to attract the best residents if we don't have robotics as part of our educational offering. And so that was also critically important. So education, training, our curriculum, all these things are important at a major academic medical center, not just clinical outcomes.
Thank you so much for laying all that out, Dr. Martin. Dr. Awad, this next question is for you. So the attendee asks, if groups are working in silos at an institution, how do you gain alignment on a shared vision for your program?
Great question. And, I think traditionally our institution has operated in silos. I think part of the challenge in overcoming that is trying to recognize that all of the sister institutions within our healthcare system are not the same. They have individual needs that are unique. Some of them are large tertiary care academic medical centers. Some of them are community hospitals that serve a different patient population. So I think that's one of the first steps, is recognizing the diverse needs of the partners within our healthcare system. We also understand, though, that we do have some commonalities. We do have common needs across the HSOs within our health system. We are all striving for the best patient care. We're all looking for efficiency in the operating room, best utilization of the resource, and training that meets a high level of quality experience for our patients and our providers that we expect. We have common challenges. We mentioned today some of those already with regard to turnover times, cost containment, and others. By bringing everybody at the table, we're able to discuss these issues openly in a forum that is safe and that allows people to talk about these common concerns and challenges, and we work together to address them.
Thank you, Dr. Awad. And this next question is for you as well, and I think it builds on this theme of sort of understanding specific needs. So the attendee asked, what steps did you put in place to best support the resident or fellow experience in the OR? Have you seen a difference in your resident competency because of these changes?
Good question. So at Barnes-Jewish Hospital, we are a teaching institution. We have over 120 trainees that are touching the robot. That's across a multitude of specialties, including GYN, urology, minimally invasive surgery, thoracic, hepatobiliary, and others. And so we do have a great need to attend to the trainee experience to make sure that it is both quality for them, but also safe for the patient. There are several things we've instituted to make that happen. So the first is recognizing that while there are some learning goals that are achieved at the bedside, the primary learning happens at the surgeon's console. Our institution has invested in a dual surgeon console for all of the robotic platforms at our teaching institutions. That allows somewhat of a driver's ed experience where the attending surgeon as well as the trainee can switch back and forth. The attending surgeon can demonstrate safe and effective techniques and how to operate by using that system. Now, in order to enable the use of the dual console, we did have to commit to having a credentialed provider at the bedside at all times. And so that begun with our RNFA program that I alluded to earlier. Our pilot was in late 2018 with a single RNFA. That pilot was a tremendous success. Not only did it enable the resident to leave the bedside and sit at the other console, but there was unintended beneficial side effects such as faster turnover times and more consistent care and so forth. As a result, the second year we expanded to 4 RNFAs, and the following year we've expanded to 8. So the ROI has been very clear for that. In addition, we have robust and formal curricula for our trainees that span all service lines regardless of specialty. We do have procedure and specialty specific curricula for advanced trainees that occurs both inside the operating room and outside. I do direct our surgical simulation center where we're fortunate to have a full-fledged robotic system which provides that hands-on training. And finally, we take a team-based approach to training, recognizing that the surgeon does not operate in isolation. So we bring our operative teams down to the simulation center where we can have a safe space, and our anesthesia providers, our surgery providers, our nursing providers work together just as they would in the operating room.
Thank you for tackling both of those, Dr. Awad, and sharing those great results. Jim, this question came through for you. So the attendee asked, BJC has had very rapid growth of their robotics program. What do you see as your biggest upcoming challenges as you continue to build a world-class robotics program?
Thank you for that question. It's very, very timely, and it's actually one of the things that we've been considering and talking about in our RSOC committee. With the rapid growth that we have seen, one of the biggest challenges is really how do we accommodate continued growth. Right now, it feels like we're in a post-pandemic recovery period. We're on track for 2021 to do 20% more cases than we saw even last year. To accommodate that growth, it would be great if we could just go out and pick up another robotics platform. Even if capital is freely available, the process to work with our state to get an additional platform is very cumbersome and timely. So just bringing another robot on site is not really an option to increase capacity. So we've had to look at other ways to manage increases in volume. Part of that has already been discussed. We've investigated our weekend program as well as extending our Monday through Friday hours to make sure that we've got the right resources to take care of patients as we need them and when we need them. The other thing that we've done is we're taking a more critical review of our actual utilization. We know some services have moved into new arenas and new procedures that they're performing robotically. We continue to look at their utilization as assigned on our block model. We know that some services are underutilized, and we actively work with those services and those individuals to make sure that they have the volume on the robotics to support the amount of block hours that they have. And when not, we reallocate that time to services that do show growth.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate you tackling that question. And we're coming close on time, so this will likely be the last question. Andrew, it's for you. The question says, how did you implement the extended use program smoothly at your institution?
I really appreciate that question because it does require a fair amount of operational and clinical planning with Intuitive and the teams to ensure that cases are supported as we made this transition. We place the regularly used instruments into instrument trays and sterilize them together. And our intent was not to discard any instruments before we had fully used them. And so the trick was that we were going to come to the end of the use of these items individually as they reach their maximum number of fires or uses. And so we had to have our inventory deployed and ready to be pulled as we got to the end of the use of any of the individual items. And so we had that ready and we're comfortable that we would be able to transition the inventory from one to the next from a logistics perspective. And the real trick was within our electronic medical record and what the intraoperative nurse was going to document. We actually sort of timed the transition of what was loaded onto our preference cards and ready in the EMR to document for when we thought we would first use any of the products. And then what we did was made a switch of all of these new catalog numbers to deactivate the old and activate the new and begin to document the new version of these items that were very similar to the existing ones. We knew that the consequent charge to the patients was going to be lower with the new instrument extended life. And so we were comfortable that we would be sort of solving kind of with an early conversion that resulted in lower charges to our patients as we sort of worked out the old inventory from our trays and adopted the new one. So it was a fairly complicated conversion, but one that we were excited to pull off because of the advantage of both the sort of minor advances in the effectiveness of the instruments, as well as, of course, the price advantage to the organization.
Thank you so much for tackling that, Andrew, and thanks to all of you. It's been wonderful. And this is all the time we have for today. I just want to once again thank Dr. Martin, Dr. Awad, Jim, and Andrew for that excellent presentation and discussion. So a big thank you as well to Intuitive for sponsoring today's webinar. As a reminder, if we did not address your question today, we will be sure to follow up with you directly after today's webinar concludes. For more information on today's content, please check out the additional resources on your webinar console, and don't forget to fill out our webinar survey. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon and a great rest of your day.